change its destiny.
Unlike some religions, Buddhism and science are not at odds with one another. Instead, Buddhism and science complement one another. The goals of science and the goals of Buddhism are in some respects similar, and in other ways opposite but complementary. With an understanding of Buddhism, it is possible to gain a greater appreciation for science. The reverse is also true. With an understanding of science, one can gain a greater appreciation for Buddhism. Though neither science nor Buddhism at this point in time offer proof of the other's validity, they both allow a dialogue that is not only interesting, but may prove fruitful to both science and Buddhism in the future.
Arise, open your eyes. The time has come to...
Looking broadly at science, we can say there are many fields of science, and many of those fields have different goals and different methods to attain those goals. In addition, like science, there are many branches or schools of Buddhism. Psychology as a branch of science has similar goals as Buddhism. Psychology seeks to understand and control human behavior. This is very close to the Buddhist goal, which is to overcome the negative qualities inside a person: greed, hostility, and ignorance, the three poisons, and bring out the higher qualities inherent in all people: compassion, wisdom, self-control, joy, fearlessness, etc. In psychology, the methods used to control people's negative qualities are very different from the methods used in Buddhism. However, a new method utilized by some psychotherapists is very similar to the method used by the historical Buddha of India, Shakyamuni, to reach enlightenment. This method is past life regression therapy. In this one area, psychotherapy and Buddhism can offer a constructive way for a dialogue between the two ways of learning and understanding. In the field of psychotherapy, the growing practice of past life regression therapy had a great takeoff after prominent psychotherapist Dr. Brian L. Weiss released his best-selling book, Many Lives, Many Masters, in the late 1980s. Since then, past life regression therapy has become openly and widely practiced in psychotherapy. What was actually discovered was that it had been widely practiced for many years. In fact, other psychotherapists had published books about past life regression therapy prior to Dr. Weiss as far back as the 1950s. However, for some reason, none of the previously published books on the practice received the same acclaim as Dr. Weiss's book. Consequently, many psychotherapists, even though they had been doing past life regression therapy for many years in the closet, were still unwilling to risk their careers by publishing what they believed would be very controversial in their field. However, after the tremendous success of Dr. Weiss's book, hundreds of psychotherapists finally gained the courage to open their many years of case study to public scrutiny by publishing them in peer journals and books. Now, luckily, one can find many books from noted psychotherapists on this growing practice. If one takes this growing field seriously, this could be a case of science illuminating the understanding of Buddhism, or vice versa. Though few psychotherapists will claim that their studies of past life regression cases are sure proof that reincarnation exists in reality, these therapists' studies of what appear to be past lives can help someone studying Buddhism understand what may have occurred to Shakyamuni under the Bodhi tree when he claimed to have reached enlightenment. Like Dr. Weiss's patients, Shakyamuni also claimed to have seen into many of his past lives. In modern regression therapy, a doctor, through hypnosis, helps his or her patient experience a regression, a reliving of a past experience. Sometimes this is simply the reliving of regressed memories from this lifetime, but often it goes back to the memories of past lives. Unlike modern regression, which is done with the aid of a licensed hypnotherapist, however, Shakyamuni said he was able to see his own past lives through his own self-guided meditation. In fact, most of the stories in the Buddhist sutras are stories of what Shakyamuni referred to as his many past incarnations. Dr. Weiss and others who study past life regression therapy think that there could be many explanations as to what actually occurs during a patient's regression. 1. A patient could experience his or her own past lives. 2. The patient could be experiencing someone else's past lives, somehow tapping in to what Carl Jung would call a collective unconscious. 3. That patient could be recalling something he or she read in a book about the past. 4. The patient could be having wild delusions of fantasy. However, after detailing so many regression cases from his patients, comparing these recollections to historical evidence, and finding out what his patients had or could have studied about the past, Dr. Weiss and others have come to the conclusion that the evidence points more toward one of the first two possibilities. Therefore, many of these therapists believe that either their patients are experiencing their own past lives, or they are experiencing the past lives of other people. If these therapists' conclusions are correct, then the Buddhist idea of consciousness can be an interesting insight, which could offer a new way of understanding these cases of past life regression. The concept in Buddhism known as the 9 levels of consciousness states that all living things have the potential of experiencing 9 levels of consciousness. The first 5 levels of consciousness are the 5 senses: taste, smell, touch, sight, and hearing. The 6th level is the regular conscious thought process. The 7th level is the subconscious mind, which is very active when a person dreams at night. The 8th level is known as the karmic storage level. This level is like a bank account of all negative and positive actions, thoughts, words, and deeds a person has performed in this life and all their previous lives. The 9th level is a level of omniscience and omnipotence, where a person has access to all that is known and can be known, throughout time and space. Buddhism calls that 9th level a person's Buddhahood. This 9th level has many similarities to Jung's idea of universal consciousness, or collective unconsciousness. According to Buddhism, consciousness is unlimited. The subconscious mind holds a record of everything experienced by a person on his or her first 6 levels of consciousness, from all of his or her infinite past lives. Depth psychology is just starting to explore the vastness of information contained in a person's subconscious mind. In addition, it is only an area that psychology has begun to study over the last 150 or more years. Therefore, it is still a new study in its very elementary stages. If a person did in fact have access to his or her billions of past lives on billions of other planets throughout the universe, as the Buddha Shakyamuni claimed to have, and as the many Buddhist sutras detail, what would this tell us about that person's philosophy, or his or her view of the cosmos? For one, it would give the possibility that that person's views are much more advanced than modern science, that these views have been formulated over an enormously long time. In addition, that person would possibly have access to the knowledge of scientists on many other planets throughout the universe, many of which may be at stages of development far in advance of science here on Earth. In regards to remembering past lives, the great Greek philosopher Socrates said to one of his disciples Meno, quote, "Since the soul is immortal and often born, having seen what is on earth and what is in the house of Hades, and everything, There is nothing it has not learnt. So there is no wonder it can remember about virtue and other things, because it knew about these before. For since all nature is akin, and the soul has learnt everything, there is nothing to hinder a man remembering one thing only, which men call learning, from himself finding out all else, if he is brave and does not weary in seeking. For seeking and learning is all remembrance. This is from the Great Dialogues of Plato, Meno 79c through 81a. What would happen to modern science if a scientist was able to find, through experiencing past life regressions, that he or she was a scientist in many other past lives, on many other planets throughout the universe? He or she may be able to share with us theories and formulas yet discovered by earthly science.
Soul inside of you, the strings to pull you through.
The scientific view of the cosmos seems to be at odds with many religious views. However, this is not the case with Buddhism. Looking at the scientific field of cosmology from a Buddhist perspective, it appears that the view of the cosmos presented by Shakyamuni some 2,500 years ago is a much more expansive view than the modern scientific view. However, as the view of Western cosmology always seems to be expanding, perhaps someday the two views will become closer aligned with one another. From a Buddhist perspective, science has simply not yet caught up with the Buddhist view, but it is slowly getting there. If it is true that Shakyamuni arrived at his view of the cosmos through remembrance of past lives, then the Buddhist view would have had much longer to develop than the modern scientific view. Therefore, compared to the Buddhist view, formulated through the billions of past lives of Shakyamuni, science would still be in its very inchoate stages. To get a slight feel for the immenseness of the Buddhist idea of time and space, it is helpful to study the Lotus Sutra's lifespan chapter, chapter 16. In it, Shakyamuni gives an analogy of where and when he first attained enlightenment. He says, this is the Japanese onyomi reading, Nenzen nanshi ga jitsujou butsu irai, muryo muhen hyakusen monnoku, nayu ta ko, hino go hyakusen monnoku, nayu ta asogi, sanzan daisen sekai, keshi unin, machi mijin, ko o tobo, go hyakusen monnoku, nayu ta asogi koku, naige ichijin, nyoze togyo, jinze mijin, shozen nanshi. And what that means in English? Suppose a person were to take 500, 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 nayuta, asamkhya, 1,000,000,000-fold worlds, and grind them to dust. Then, moving eastward, each time he passes 500, 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 nayuta asamkhya worlds, he drops a particle of dust. He continues eastward in this way until he has finished dropping all the particles. Suppose all these worlds, whether they received a particle of dust or not, are once more reduced to dust. Let one particle represent one kalpa. The time that has passed since I attained Buddhahood surpasses this by 100, 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 nayuta asamkhya kalpas. That's from the Lotus Sutra, chapter 16. Through this one story in the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, one can begin to see the expansiveness of the Buddhist cosmic view. In Buddhist cosmology, there is the idea of a minor world system, a medium world system, and a major world system. Daisaku Ikeda says in his dialogue entitled Buddhism in the Cosmos that a minor world system in Buddhism is similar to a solar system, a medium world system is similar to a galaxy, and a major world system is comparable to what scientists now call the universe, that area that some scientists believe started with the Big Bang, which is believed to be anywhere from 15 to 17 billion light years across.
Within a sea of change.
In Buddhism, the modern scientific concept of the universe is thought of as just one speck in an infinite number of minor, medium, and major world systems. The amount of time described in the above quote from the Lotus Sutra is unfathomable. Some interpret just the first sentence of the above passage to mean 500 times 1,000 times 10,000 times 1,000,000 times 10 to the 60th power times 10 to the 56th power of universes ground to dust, where each particle represents a kalpa. Without going into the rest of the sentences, which increases the time exponentially, this first number alone is beyond comprehension. Though this is so much more expansive than the present scientific concept of time and space, it is important to remember that the scientific idea of the universe has expanded exponentially from Aristotle's view to Ptolemy's view to Einstein's view. If this trend continues, the Western concept of the universe will likely continue expanding until it becomes closer to the Buddhist idea of an infinite number of Big Bangs and perhaps big contractions, with infinite numbers of habitable planets in an infinite multiverse. Daisaku Ikeda, in his Harvard University address entitled Mahayana Buddhism in the 21st Century Civilization, said that science and Buddhism both deal with the law of cause and effect. However, the law of cause and effect for science deals with the natural world, and it tells us how things operate in nature. Contrarily, Buddhism's law of cause and effect deals with the internal world of human beings, and it tells us why things happen the way they do to human beings and between human beings, and how we can change human interaction and human destiny. Both ways of looking at reality are not antagonistic, but rather are complementary. Once again, the goals of Buddhism and science are in some ways both the same and in other ways complementary. For instance, one of the goals of Buddhism is for the practitioner to become enlightened, or for that person to become an enlightened human being, which Buddhism calls a Buddha. In many respects, this is one of the goals of science as well, with the hope of, quote, putting a limit on error. However, scientists want to be enlightened to how physical reality works. Therefore, they seek empirical knowledge. Buddhists, on the other hand, want to know why things happen the way they do. Yet more important than knowledge to Buddhists is the search for wisdom, which according to Buddhism is inherent in consciousness, which all life is a manifestation of. The practical application of science seems to be to gain control over the physical world. On the contrary, the goal of Buddhism is to first gain control over oneself, and then through self-control one can gain control over his or her environment, how one reacts to the environment, and how one's environment responds to oneself. Where the search is directed is also different. Most branches of science search for answers by looking outward into the environment. On the contrary, Buddhism believes that all the answers are inherent in life itself or in the consciousness of living beings. Nevertheless, both inward and outward searching are not antagonistic, but once again they are complementary journeys.
It's all inside a treasure tower, so sublime. It's all within a priceless jewel beneath our skin, and every heartache, every pain makes you stronger, makes you wiser. It makes you come.
While believing that the internal life or consciousness of living beings is the essential source of all solutions, reminiscent of Socrates' remembrance, Buddhism also believes that living beings and their environment are inseparable. Therefore, the inherent wisdom that living beings possess is also inherent in all things in the universe. This brings us to two essential core beliefs of Mahayana Buddhism, two beliefs that parallel some beliefs held in quantum mechanics and in psychology. One is Shikishin Funi, the other is Esho Funi. Funi in both concepts literally means to be, quote, two but not two. It is often referred to as oneness. Shiki means body and Shin means heart or mind. The first concept is very similar to what psychology refers to with the phrase psychosomatic. The idea that one's thoughts have an effect on one's body and physical health is an idea that is now generally accepted in psychology. The reverse as well is also gaining credibility. There have been many studies in the science of neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, for example, which have shown that one can change one's thoughts and one's moods by simply changing his or her posture and his or her facial expressions. The second term, Esho Funi, is translated as the oneness of life and its environment. As Ted Marino, the SGI USA Study Department Chief, explains it, quote, Esho is a contraction of Eho, the insentient environment, or objective world, and Shoho, the self, or subjective world. E in Eho means to depend, and Sho in Shoho means subject, signifying that the environment is necessary for the self to exist. Ho in both words means manifest effect, suggesting that an individual's karma appears in both his or her subjective and objective realities. Funi drives home the point that self and environment, while two independent phenomena, are one in their fundamental essence. They are both part of life. End quote. Analogous to this concept, the science of biology, with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, postulates that life is a product of its environment. While Buddhism does not necessarily disagree with this point of view, it postulates that the reverse is also true. In Buddhism, an environment is a product of the life condition or karma of the beings that cohabitate with the environment. For Buddhism, what this means is that if one changes one's life condition or one's karma, his or her environment will naturally change as well. As noted above, the goal of Buddhism is to gain control over the negative aspects of one's life, while at the same time bringing out the positive aspects of one's life. With the idea of Esho Funi, Buddhism claims that by bringing out the highest quality in oneself, one can cause the environment he or she lives in to exhibit its highest quality as well. If this Buddhist idea of the inseparability of life and its environment is true, what could be the ramifications for a scientist studying the physical world? The idea that the physical world is a conscious entity is an idea that is detailed by Gary Zukav in his book Dancing Woolly Masters, an overview of the new physics. He explains that many in the field of quantum mechanics came to the view that light, exhibiting the simultaneous qualities of both a wave and a particle, exhibits a sort of consciousness. A wave, he claims, is a kind of thought form. He also states that this idea has been extrapolated by quantum mechanists to the idea that all physical reality is, quote, a pattern of organic energy, end quote, which he translates as Wu Li in Chinese. In calling it organic, he says, they mean that it is conscious and living. Zukav also states an idea that is so much like the concept of Esho Funi. He says that perhaps the consciousness of humans studying nature has an effect on the consciousness of nature, thus changing nature or causing it to evolve. On the quantum level, it seems the more humans study nature, the more complex and expansive it becomes. First we found atoms, then we found that those atoms were composed of electrons, neutrons, and protons. Then we found that those electrons, neutrons, and protons were made up of quarks and leptons. Now many scientists believe that these quarks and leptons are made up of thinner things, or non-things, called strings. Will this be the last reduction? Most likely not. Zukov asks the question, is it simply that nature is expanding as we study it, as an effect of our consciousness provoking that which we are studying to evolve consciously? The idea Zukov brings to mind with this question relates very much with the idea in Buddhism known as the 10 factors of life, the most profound teaching from the Lotus Sutra's Expedient Means chapter, or chapter 2. Both Shikishin Funi and Esho Funi originate from the 10 factors of life, along with many other revolutionary concepts of Mahayana Buddhism.
I've been there too, I know a pain, but all alone I feel the strength within. It's all inside a treasure tower.
In Buddhism, everything is affected by consciousness, while at the same time all consciousness is affected by the physical world. For Buddhism, physical reality, which is the first factor of the 10 factors of life, or appearance, and conscious spiritual reality, which is the second factor, or nature, are two of the simultaneous manifestations of the third factor of life, the entity of life, otherwise known as the law of life, Myoho Renge Kyo. In the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni says to one of his wisest disciples, Shariputra, who has followed him closely for most of his 50 or so years of teaching, in Japanese onyomi, Bu shitsu joju shi sharihatsu, joshu bu setsu, shoi shaga, busho joju, daitsukeu, nange shiho, yuibutsu yobutsu, naino kujin, shoho jisho, shoi shoho, nyoze so, nyoze sho, nyoze tai, nyoze riki, nyoze sa, nyoze in, nyoze en, nyoze ka, nyoze ho, nyoze honma kukyoto. In English, but stop, Shariputra, I will say no more. Why? Because what the Buddha has achieved is the rarest and most difficult to understand law. The true entity of all phenomena can only be understood and shared between Buddhas. This reality consists of the appearance, nature, entity, power, influence or external cause, inherent cause, relation, latent effect, manifest effect, and their consistency from beginning to end. This is from the Lotus Sutra, chapter 2. It would take many books to fully explain what all 10 factors mean. The great Chinese Buddhist scholar Tiantai tried to do so in his colossal work, The Great Concentration and Insight on the Lotus Sutra. I will only attempt a brief explanation and detail how it relates to many ideas of modern science. The first 3 factors of life deal with how life manifests. By life, Buddhism, like Zukov's idea of Wu Li, means all reality, both physical and conscious spiritual reality. The entity of life, Nyoze Tai, otherwise known as the law of life, Myoho Renge Kyo, manifests itself simultaneously as the appearance of life, Nyoze So, physical reality, and the nature of life, Nyoze Sho, or conscious and spiritual reality, which is similar to Zukov's idea of a thought form. Life manifests these 2 factors of appearance and nature only in relationship to causes and conditions which are explained by the other 7 factors of life. Without the many causes and conditions, life could not manifest. Life, like all energy, would stay in a latent stage, as potential energy, until the conditions are right for it to become manifested as kinetic energy. This parallels what Zukov explains as the 2 aspects of light according to quantum mechanics. Under different sets of experiments, light proves to be both a particle, which is a photon, which in Buddhism represents the factor of appearance, and a wave, or a thought form, which in Buddhism represents the factor of nature. The 2 are manifestations of 2 aspects of the same reality, or as Buddhism describes in the concept Funi, they are 2 but not 2. Buddhism would also say that light is neither a wave nor a particle, but rather it is an entity that manifests as both a wave and a particle only in relationship to how it is studied, or in relationship to causes and conditions, which is the other 7 factors of life, which is how all life manifests. According to Buddhism, all reality manifests these 2 aspects, or these 2 factors. This is the Buddhist explanation of why the mind and the body are inseparable, Shikishin Funi, because they are not really different things. They are simply 2 manifestations of the same reality. They are factors of an ultimate reality, which Buddhism calls the law of life, Myoho Renge Kyo.
Within our lives there is a key to open doors to set us free. We create the future, you and me. The time is now, as you can see.
In the science of brain chemistry, otherwise known as neurochemistry, we are now seeing that there are chemicals created by the brain for every feeling a person experiences. For example, we see that when a person is happy, his or her brain secretes certain hormones such as dopamine. When a person is stressed, their brain secretes norepinephrine, a stress hormone. The same is true when that person is sad. His or her brain secretes chemicals for sadness. Feelings of love are also accompanied by chemical reactions. When someone feels love, that person is having a chemical reaction with another person's pheromones. Because of this, some scientists will go as far as claiming that love is nothing but a chemical reaction. However, this only demonstrates the extreme bias in most fields of science, which focus primarily on one side of reality, the physical aspect of reality, while negating the importance of the conscious spiritual side of reality, or as Buddhism would call it, the nature of reality. Do scientists neglect the conscious spiritual side of reality because that side of reality is much harder to understand and so much harder to prove? Do they take the easier road by studying only, as Herman Bondi said, an area where such perfection of solution is possible? This materialist bias in science goes back as far as Aristotle, who said, quote, "Credit must be given to observation rather than to theories, and to theories only insofar as they are confirmed by the observed facts." Similarly, when Einstein said, quote, "All knowledge of reality starts from experience and ends in it," most scientists assume he meant only physical experience and not conscious spiritual experience. However, one scientist did explore past the easy and comfortable physical side of reality to delve into its other side. Descartes, in his famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," claimed he could only prove to himself that he existed in reality because he could experience the sensation of thinking. He could not prove to himself that his experience of the physical world was not just a dream. For science to ever mature past its physical adolescence and come closer to a holistic understanding of reality, it will someday have to overcome its mental laziness and focus more attention on the other half of life's manifestation. Descartes was just starting to delve into that area. Physics has only recently found that the terrestrial laws, or the laws on Earth, are synthesized with cosmic laws, or the laws in outer space. In other words, what is true on planet Earth is also true in the heavens. All laws work just the same no matter where you are in the universe. However, physics is still searching for the synthesis between cosmic terrestrial laws and the laws of quantum mechanics. In other words, physicists are trying to see how the cosmic laws, such as gravitation, the law of motion, etc., can be synthesized with the laws controlling the forces inside an atom, which as of now seem to act on laws that are completely different from cosmic laws.
The time is now, as you can see, nothing can stop us.
An understanding of the Buddhist concept of the 10 factors of life may allow scientists to finally unravel these mysteries. In addition, the Buddhist concept derived from the 10 factors, the oneness of life and its environment, Eshofuni, and the oneness of body and mind, Shikishinfuni, may allow scientists to go beyond simply synthesizing cosmic laws and the laws of quantum mechanics, but may even allow them to synthesize the life sciences with the physical sciences, which will be a much more difficult task than the former. If science comes to an understanding of what Buddhism describes in the other 7 factors of life, scientists may believe that such syntheses are possible. However, before we go on to touch upon the other 7 factors, another way of understanding the first 3 factors of life, which are appearance, nature, and entity, is to realize that everything in the universe is an entity that contains a physical makeup, or appearance, and a conscious spiritual makeup, or a nature. For instance, an atom has a physical makeup. It has 1 or more neutrons and protons. It has 1 or more electrons, and these particles are made up of smaller particles called quarks and leptons. According to Buddhism, there is no end to this reduction because everything is infinite. We are able to see atoms now with a strong enough microscope and see their physical appearance. In addition, all atoms have a distinct nature, and each constituent part of an atom has its own respective nature as well. For instance, a hydrogen atom has a different nature than an oxygen atom. One of the respective natures of a particular atom is to have a different reaction with another atom. Similarly, a proton has a nature, which we describe by its positive electric charge. The nature of an electron is its negative electric charge, and a neutron's nature is that it has no electric charge at all. The nature of an atom is determined by its appearance. For example, if an atom has the appearance of a hydrogen atom, then its nature is also the same as another hydrogen atom with the same appearance. Because of the 10th factor of life, which is no-ze honmaku kyoto, or in English, consistency from beginning to end, all atoms that have 1 proton, 1 neutron, and 1 electron all have the exact same nature, even though they are physically different atoms. For instance, hydrogen atom A in Texas and hydrogen atom B in California both have the same nature, because they both have the same appearance, 1 proton, 1 electron, and generally 1 neutron. This is true of a hydrogen atom on Mars and a hydrogen atom on a planet in a far-off constellation. Why is this? From a Buddhist perspective, it is because of the 10th factor of life, the consistency from beginning to end of the law of life. From a scientific perspective, we may say it is because of the scientific law of symmetry. Similarly, a planet has an appearance. It is spherical, it has color, and it has physical formations on it, such as mountains and valleys, or clouds of gases and liquids. In addition, all planets have a nature. For instance, one of the natures of a planet is to have gravitational pull on objects in close proximity to it. Therefore, if it has a moon circling it, one of the planet's natures is to exert a force of gravitation on that moon, to keep the moon moving around it, and to keep that moon from flying away from the planet. Some of the many natures of the sun, for example, is to cause an effect on the tides on Earth and to give off heat to nearby planets. One of the natures of our planet Earth is to sustain life, etc. There is no way to fully explain anything in the universe without explaining it as an entity of the two factors of appearance and nature. Nothing contains only physical reality. If something was able to exist in isolation, we may think of it as a purely physical thing, with no nature. If, for example, there were no objects on the Earth, we would maybe be unaware of the Earth's force of gravity. And if a planet had no moons, we might be unaware of its ability to have a force upon a moon, and that if it had a moon, its moon could have a force upon that planet. In addition, if there was no sun for the planets in our solar system to revolve around, we may not even know that those planets rotate and revolve. Everything is only perceptible, both physically and conscious spiritually, because of its relationship to everything else that exists. We only notice the nature of something physical and how it relates to other physical things. However, the reverse is also true of all things physical. Each thing only has the appearance of being physical because of the nature of its constituent parts, and how those constituent parts relate to one another. If atoms did not have natures, such as covalent bonds, we may not notice them as physical, because they may not stay together. Everything physical is made up of a bunch of constituent parts, and those parts are made up of a bunch of smaller constituent parts. And those parts are further made up of smaller constituent parts. Everything in Buddhism is based on the concept of infinity. Therefore, Buddhists believe we can reduce this endlessly. It's just a matter of expanding our consciousness. However, eventually, as we go smaller and smaller, we may have to admit that nothing really is there, just nature. Or as quantum mechanics may say, the possibilities and probabilities of existence. If we could actually see things on a subatomic level, if we had stronger vision, we would see more space between things than we would see things, which leads Deepak Chopra to say, quote, "All this stuff is really just non-stuff." End quote. If we were able to see things at their subatomic level, we would see nothing physical. Yet we would still say we know that we are observing something physical, even though we cannot see it, because of the thing's nature. So even if we could not see an electron in an atom, we still say it has to be there, because we can experience the nature of the negative electric charge of the electron. This is the same with strings in string theory. Scientists believe strings exist because of the nature of mathematics. No one can prove, however, that strings exist as physical reality, but we assume that they must exist because we experience their nature. In addition, many strings together make up what to us appears to be physical reality. However, from the Buddhist idea of funi, which is two but not two, or oneness, we could say that neither their appearance nor their nature really exist independently, but both exist only as manifestations of the entity of life, which manifests itself physically as appearance, and consciously or spiritually as nature, but only in relationship to everything else that exists. Therefore, from the string theory's perspective, it is only through the relationship between the strings that anything appears to exist. It is only the relationship between one thing and another thing that gives the two things an appearance and a nature.
We can do so much together, you and I. If all these little things won't tear us apart, I chose to spend this life with you, my love. What will it take for us to rise above?
To get a Buddhist perspective on why things appear to exist and seem to have the nature of existing, we have to understand the other 7 factors of life. The 4th through 10th factors, 4 being power, nyose riki, 5 influence, nyose sa, 6 inherent cause, nyose in, 7 relation, nyose en, or external cause, 8 latent effect, nyose ka, 9 manifest effect, nyose ho, and 10 consistency from beginning to end, nyose honma kukyo to, all explain the cause and effect relationships between both physical and conscious spiritual reality, and between the entity of that reality and the entity of all other realities. According to Buddhism, without the cause and effect relationship, both physical reality and conscious spiritual reality would cease to exist. They are simply manifestations of these causes and conditions. This is where the idea of non-substantiality or emptiness, which is ku in Japanese, in Buddhism originated. In Buddhism, everything is empty of individual or independent existence. In other words, everything exists only as a web of relations. Now, however, as Deepak Chopra and Brian Zukoff point out, some in the field of quantum mechanics are also realizing that physical reality has no physical substance whatsoever. The substance of reality only appears to exist physically in relationship to other things that appear to exist. The idea of string theory seems to be going in this same direction. Most string theorists would hesitate to say that there is any physical substance to strings. If so, what is that substance? What is the constituent matter of strings? And below that, what is the constituent matter of that constituent matter? For something to exist, it has to be made of something else, right? At least that has been our Western perception of reality up until quantum mechanics and string theory started to question this perception of reality. We can keep going smaller and smaller until nothing is there at all, just possibilities, which are thought forms. To Zukov, these are simply patterns of organic energy which appear physical in relationship to other things that appear to be physical. This idea is congruent with what Buddhism calls dependent origination. This is the idea that everything comes into existence and continues existing only in relationship to everything else that exists. Because this exists, that exists, and vice versa. There is no such thing as independent existence in Buddhism. The last 7 factors of life explain the symmetry between all relations, or rather, between all of the 10 factors of life. For example, power, which is the 4th factor, explains the inherent force or forces within all things, and how, when those forces are activated, they have an influence, which is the fifth factor, on their external environment. However, because of the 10th factor of life, which is consistency from beginning to end, or as science might call it, symmetry, the environment also has a power and thus an influence on all things as well. Another way to say this is that there is a symmetrical power and influence from object to subject and from subject to object. However, this dualistic way of thinking about things as either subjects or objects really should be called subject and subject, as all things are subject to all other things. There is really no such thing as objective reality according to Buddhism, because all things are subjective. Looking at these two factors of power and influence in relationship to cosmology, when observing large planets, one of the inherent forces we notice is the planet's gravitational force on other planets or moons. Without other planets to influence a large planet, however, that force may not be apparent. However, because there are things near each planet, such as the objects on the planet getting pulled to the planet's center, or moons going around the planet, or even other planets in close proximity to the planet, the latent or inherent force of gravity is manifested. However, that force of gravity is only proportional to the mass of both objects. For example, the force of gravity between the planet Earth and its one moon is only proportional to the size of both the Earth and the moon that revolves around the Earth. Scientists know there is symmetry in the gravitational force exerted on a planet's moons based on the size of both the planet and its moons. The idea of symmetry from a Buddhist perspective is described as the 10th factor of life, consistency from beginning to end. The 6th through the 9th factor of life, internal cause, relation, or external cause, latent effect and manifest effect, explain the workings of cause and effect on both the physical and the conscious spiritual planes. Just as in science, quote, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, end quote, which is part of Newton's law of motion, Buddhism states that the same is also true for the actions of thoughts, words, and deeds. These three types of actions, the Indian word karma means action, that a human performs, cause an equal and opposite reaction back to that human. The 8th factor of life gives us the idea of instant karma, as John Lennon sang about. Even though someone's actions do not have what may appear to be an instant effect, the potential for that effect is already stored in the person's 8th level of consciousness, waiting for the right causes and conditions in which to manifest. So once you do, say, or think anything, you have created a latent effect that will manifest as soon as all the causes and conditions are right for it to manifest. However, that latent effect is still instantly manifesting in your life as energy. We know that energy in our life has either a positive or negative effect on our state of mind and psychosomatically on our health. Here is one way of looking at the 6th and 7th factors of life in relationship to human feelings. All humans have the inherent tendency for the feeling of love, hate, and many other emotions. These are all inherent causes or internal causes. However, without someone in our environment to stir our feeling of love or hate, we could never manifest those feelings. Therefore, we need a relation, an external cause, to allow us to manifest our internal cause. There is symmetry in these attractions. There is consistency from beginning to end. However much a person stimulates another to feel love or hate, that person will manifest those feelings to that degree. From these few examples of the similarity of concepts between Buddhism and science, one can see that both Buddhism and science have a lot to offer each other, to push each other to new ways of viewing reality. There are many more similarities, such as the Buddhist concept of the 10 worlds and its relationship to psychology and brain chemistry, and probably even other similarities that I am not yet aware of, nor far too many to detail in this short paper. Hopefully, as science progresses and the study of Buddhism progresses, each will continue offering complementary perspectives to the other, and hopefully a richer dialogue will emerge from the study of both. If science is to progress quicker, it must be open to alternative views of reality. In addition, if the understanding of Buddhism is to progress, and if Buddhists are to become more enlightened, they must constantly challenge their views of reality by comparing them with the views of science. That concludes my essay, A Buddhist Dialogue with Science. Good night, goodbye everyone, and I hope you enjoy the final song that I'm leaving you with.
Every single time that you run away, you'll realize that you've run to the same place you thought you left behind. Where you running now, my friend, don't you realize? Though you've run away, you haven't changed a single thing inside. Where you running now, my friend, don't you realize? It's all up to you. Everything you think and do, you control your destiny. You don't even need all the things you think will add up to who you are inside. A little conscious change will send out ripple, changing space and time. Don't you see